Hello, everybody, and welcome to History with Dr. Tom. So this is the fourth lecture in the American Civil War series, and I hope you've enjoyed the lectures so far. I'll encourage you again, if you do like this lecture, please make sure you tick on like on the YouTube channel, and also please feel free to subscribe. Now, today's lecture is going to be focusing on the Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858. Now, political debates between candidates has always been, I wouldn't say a favorite pastime in American history, but something which has always garnered quite a lot of attention from both the media and the people. The Lincoln-Douglas debate is a very good example of that. So what's going on here? So yes, 1858, there is a midterm election halfway between the presidential elections of 1856 and 1860. This midterm election will see all representatives and the House of Representatives up for re-election and a third of the state senators. One of the state senators up for re-election was one of the Illinois senators, Stephen A. Douglas. Now, we are very familiar with Stephen Douglas already because he is the one that came up with the idea of popular sovereignty to resolve the slavery issues, or so he thought it would. Obviously, it did not. It created a real disaster. And he is going to stand again as the Democratic Party candidate for the state of Illinois. Standing against him is a new face in American politics for the most part, Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln was a Republican candidate. Previously, he had been a member of the Whig Party, which of course is no more by this point, and he's since decided to join the Republicans. And this is going to be the event which is going to make Lincoln go from being a very unknown man to a very popular and hated man in the United States. It's going to boost his profile. So this is a very, very significant event. In a lot of ways, this is the event which will make Lincoln. It will create the Lincoln that we come to know during the Civil War. Now, Abraham Lincoln could not be more different from Stephen Douglas. Okay, so both Douglas and Lincoln, they do have one thing in common. Although they are both living in Illinois at this time, neither of them are from there. So Stephen Douglas is actually born in Vermont, lived in New York for a while after that, and then eventually moved out to Illinois. Abraham Lincoln, on the other hand, was born in Kentucky, a southern state, a slave state. And he then moved to Indiana and eventually to Illinois. Now, personal backgrounds could not be much more different than they actually were. Douglas comes from a rather well-to-do background. Abraham Lincoln came from a background of poverty. Abraham Lincoln was what you call a self-made man. He was self-educated. He did not attend college or university. So he basically taught himself how to read and write. He educated himself. He was an avid reader and one of the most determined people in American history, if not the most determined. One of the most brilliant people in American history as well, it goes without saying. So let's take a look at these debates more closely. Now, the midterm elections held in 1858 involved numerous states. Illinois, as I mentioned, was just one of them. Douglas is facing a re-election. If he does win, then he will serve another 6-year term, if he lives long enough, that is. So Abraham Lincoln running against him. And these candidates agree to a series of debates. There will be 7 debates between them scattered across the state of Illinois. Now, this is obviously an Illinois affair. It's only the state of Illinois picking the Illinois senator. And there's other senatorial races going on around the country. But why is this one so big? It's for 2 reasons. One is because Stephen Douglas, by 1858, is such a big name in American politics, owing to his being the father of what we now call popular sovereignty, of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And you could say, really, one of the most reckless politicians we've ever seen, because the results of his ideas have been violent, have resulted in deaths of hundreds of people. They have exacerbated the debate about slavery. Okay, that's one of the reasons. The other reason is because this up-and-coming Republican candidate, Abraham Lincoln, who had this reputation of being very rugged, and he was in a lot of ways. He was not one who was really big on fashion. His favorite hobbies included things like boxing and wrestling and chopping down trees. He was not your normal politician, but on top of that, he is a Republican. A lot of people know him already actually as a very well-spoken Republican, despite the fact that by standards of the mid-19th century, he's uneducated. So they didn't tend to fancy people who were self-educated as much as those who went through the proper line of education, university, etc., etc. But the media was very curious as to what sort of person Lincoln was and how he might come across in these 7 debates. And so you had newspapers coming from all around the United States to Illinois specifically to watch these debates. And what they ended up doing, they went further than that. Most of the newspapers end up publishing the full transcripts of all the debates. Everything Lincoln said, everything Douglas said is going to be put in print and made available to much of the United States. And the United States citizens from all over will pay close attention to this debate. Right, now this debate, as I've said, is one of the most historic set of debates we've had in American history. And it has been the subject of quite a lot of artist work, such as this one here by Mort Kunstler. And you can see also the physical difference between these guys. You've got, look, you got Stephen Douglas in the background looking very, very posh, very proper, very emboldened, very determined, very professional. Look at the way he's dressed. Look at his waistcoat. I mean, he looks like a pure gentleman. He's also very big. He's also very short. His nickname is the Little Giant. Abraham Lincoln, tall, very tall, 6'4" in fact, and that's without wearing the top hat. He was a big guy. But Abraham Lincoln, look what he's done in that. He's taken his top hat off. He's taken his morning coat off. He's rolled up his sleeves. He is a man who's come here for action, and he is there to get to work and get to business. So he does come across to a lot of the audiences, as well as the media, as a much more common man than Douglas. Now, they argued on a number of issues. So Lincoln openly referred to slavery in these debates as a, quote, moral, social, and political wrong. Well, I don't think I need to tell you that people in the South who read that were horrified that the Republicans are still banging on about slavery from a moral standpoint, that it is immoral. Another very famous quote that came from Lincoln in these debates is the second bullet point there. A house divided cannot stand. Government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. So with that, is he saying that slavery cannot continue in the United States forever? Well, that's how a lot of Southerners interpreted that. And that is something that you have to understand. All right, so Lincoln also argued that the Constitution, the way that he interpreted it, gave blacks the same rights as whites, the right to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. So that was a very controversial statement as well. However, I need to make very clear that Abraham Lincoln did not consider himself to be an abolitionist. Although he viewed slavery as immoral, he was against immediate emancipation at this point. The reason is because he thought it would be too much of a change too quickly, and it would be bad for the economy, bad for society, and we needed a more long-term, gradual plan in order to deal with the slavery problem. And so he endorsed the idea of gradual emancipation, and he even favored giving full compensation for all Southern masters for losing their slaves should gradual emancipation be adopted. Now, Lincoln also went further and argued very vehemently in all these debates that blacks were not equal to whites. Lincoln was not of the idea that blacks and whites were equal. He was not in favor of many civil rights for blacks whatsoever. Abraham Lincoln did not believe that blacks should have the right to vote at any point. He also did not think, therefore, they should be able to hold any political office, serve on juries, or interracial marriage. He also thought that should be barred. Well, it already was, but he thought that should continue to be the case. Now, if we have gradual emancipation, what do we as the United States do with these millions of freed slaves? Abraham Lincoln was in favor of deporting them, and he wanted to send them to Liberia in West Africa. Now, let's look at what Douglas's views were. Now, Douglas viewed the Constitution differently from Lincoln, and he was very clear in his arguments as to why this was. He states that there had only been one free state in 1787, Vermont, where he was born, and that nearly all founding fathers were slave owners at some point in their lives, and therefore slavery is one of the rocks upon which the United States is built, therefore we should not question it. He also stated that blacks were not citizens, and that basically that whether or not states should have slavery should be determined by popular sovereignty. So he's still banging on about this idea of popular sovereignty in spite of all the bloodshed in Kansas, the threat of bloodshed elsewhere. He's still going on about it. And he also pointed out that, said, quote, "Our government can endure forever divided into free and slave states as our founding fathers made it." So he was looking to history as a way of defending slavery, looking at the founding fathers as a way of defending slavery, and looking to the Constitution as a way of defending slavery. Now, Liberia, I want to go back to one bit of Lincoln's particular argument in regards to what to do with freed slaves should gradual abolition happen. This is the flag of Liberia. This country was set up by the United States, and so you can see the very real similarities of the Liberian flag today with the American flag. They also, unsurprisingly, argued about the Dred Scott decision from 1857, the Supreme Court decision. Lincoln was very open about the fact that he disagreed with this ruling. He said that it was wrong, it should be reversed. He went further to argue that slaves should absolutely not be able to be taken to free states as property, and if so, then masters should accept the fact that once you take them there, they are free. He went further to state that that decision had been reached by a Supreme Court which was dominated by justices who had been nominated by Democratic presidents. Therefore, this ruling was pro-Democratic Party, and that the Democrats were much more friendly to slavery than any other political party at this point, obviously. But also that this just was not an impartial one at all. Douglas had a very strict stance on Dred Scott. And that quote there, "I take the decision of the Supreme Court as the law of the land, and I intend to obey them as such." So he's of this perspective that the Supreme Court has spoken. They determine the law of the land. They determine what is and what is not constitutional. And therefore, if they have made this decision, we need to honor it. And he went further to say that only white men were eligible to be citizens of the United States. Therefore, blacks do not have access to the federal court for anything, any purpose. So basically, echoing what was the Supreme Court decision in 1857 as led by Chief Justice Roger B. Taney. Now, Compromise of 1850. Lincoln has got some very real opinions of this, as does Douglas. So you'll remember that Utah and New Mexico were both territories at the time. And although California had entered the Union as a free state, we still weren't sure what to do about Utah and New Mexico, but we're having the idea that popular sovereignty could solve that issue altogether in the near future. Now, Abraham Lincoln did not think that this was going to work, and he was willing to agree perhaps that Utah and New Mexico could use popular sovereignty, but he did not like the fact that because that was discussed in the compromise in 1850, that this idea should have been expanded to Kansas and Nebraska in 1854, as suggested and designed by Stephen Douglas, his opponent. And he went further to criticize the Kansas-Nebraska Act right there in front of its author. stating that it only benefited the South, not the North. Douglas was very critical in his response to this by slamming the Republican Party, saying that they were not a party of national unity and that they only represented one region of the country. That region he's referring to in 1858 is New England, which is an area which saw great popularity in the abolitionist movement compared to other regions. He also argued that compromises were becoming much more difficult in Congress and after 1850, that compromise, and the reason is because of the Republican Party, who he felt had a platform of being anti-compromise, and therefore he believed that the Republican Party was further splintering the United States and causing a risk of civil war. And he, just to hit the nail on the head, he looked at Lincoln and reminded him about the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. And it said that there is no mention of slavery in the Constitution. Therefore, that is left to the states, as or by the 10th Amendment, for them to decide for themselves. Now, the results of the Lincoln-Douglas debates, well, you see the results of the election. Douglas won 54%, Lincoln 46%. Now, it's very important to highlight the fact that back then, senatorial elections were not determined by popular vote. So the individual citizens of the states did not directly elect their senators back then. State legislators did that. And it happens to be that the Illinois state legislature at that time, in 1858, was dominated by the Democratic Party. So guess what? They picked the Democratic candidate. So Stephen Douglas is the winner of the 1858 senatorial election for the state of Illinois. But what is the long-term impact here? And long-term, we're talking about 2-3 years. How did these debates really cause sexualism to worsen? Okay, well, that's very easy to highlight. So Lincoln was constantly criticizing slavery throughout these 7 debates, and pretty much stated that slavery would not be able to stay in the United States legally forever. And as a result, Lincoln was very quickly labeled to be the worst enemy of the South. And yes, there's no question about it. Douglas won his re-election. He is being granted another 6-year term as senator for the state. But we have to keep in mind that there is at the same time a bit of a divide happening between Northern Democrats and Southern Democrats. Douglas, in these debates, did not ever attack slavery. He did defend it, but Southerners were very quick to point out that he did not defend it as viciously as Southern Democratic senators do. Of course, Southerners prefer the likes of John C. Calhoun and some of the other fire eaters, as we're now calling these Southern pro-slavery senators and representatives. And so the South is starting to look at the Democratic Party as one that could potentially be dominated by Northern Democrats. And they are starting to think that, well, you know, it'd be nice if we could take control of this party. And if not, we could create our own party, almost like a secession within the party. Well, that's what we're looking at. And that's what is going to happen in 1860. So those are the long-term impacts of the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Douglas, yes, he does defend slavery, but not viciously. And so Southerners are starting to look at him as, yeah, he's a Democrat, but he's a Northern Democrat. He's not quite one of us. And we got a presidential election in 2 years. So the South is already looking at putting up their own candidates within the Democratic Party. So we will come back to that in the next lecture, as we will about the fire eaters. And I want to close by also highlighting the fact that there are a number of statues of Lincoln and Douglas together in their debates. Forever memorialized in that state is one of the principal, most historic events which took place within the borders of the state of Illinois, were these debates between Lincoln and Douglas. And I love the way that they present Abraham Lincoln. He's, yes, very tall. Douglas is very short and stout. The little giant, as he was called, standing there next to Honest Abe. But make no mistake about it, it's a very, very historic event. Well, with that in mind, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. And again, please feel free to like this video and please subscribe. And the next lecture will be coming out soon. Look forward to seeing you then. Thank you. Bye-bye.